and I think, Alan, you've identified a number of the important ones, and I think that they did have some impact. But the overall picture was that de facto there was substantially more support for heavy industry than for downstream sectors. Even when this wasn't really part of official or kind of broad policy pronouncements, the heavy industries were supported in a whole range of ways that we know about: cheap electricity, IDC financing, and also not acting against anti-competitive practices. I think the other really important thing is that those kind of industrial interventions were also taking place, and in many ways, I think, played into a massive corporate restructuring that was happening over the 1990s and much of the 2000s, which was shaped by kind of macro financial and trade policies, and the consequence of which was that there was a shift of large corporates from tradable to non-tradable sectors. There was a shift within manufacturing and tradable sectors, which was really consequential in the sense that where large firms were able to kind of consolidate and exert monopolistic power over particular manufacturing sectors, they kind of stayed in manufacturing. That was largely in the heavy industries, but also, for instance, in parts of agro-processing. And where they weren't, they exited, often in ways that destroyed industrial capabilities. And what you really had over that period then was kind of high corporate profitability, low fixed investment, and limited structural transformation. And that really, in my view, contributed quite significantly to the unraveling of the kind of social contract, the Mandela era social contract in South Africa, and undermining of the legitimacy both of the state and of the corporate sector. And I think this is important because we've lost a lot of capabilities and a lot of time over this period. And looking forward in a positive way, we need to build these developmental coalitions. Sorry, I will wrap up. Across a range of firms, large, the more dynamic medium-sized firms, small and medium, and also really scale up the support for Black industrialists in the process. And apologies for turning into an additional panelist, but I just felt that I needed to respond to that. Thank you.
Thanks. So we will collect all of the remaining questions because we only have 20 minutes left for the panel. Can I just ask people just to ask their questions quite briefly? Anthony?
Yes, thanks, Fiona, and thanks to the panelists for some very interesting inputs. Ha-Joon, I'd like to put a question to you. It's actually a question I asked you when you were in Cape Town. It must have been around 10 years ago or something. And the question was simply, given South Africa's incredible unemployment rate, what, if anything, should be different about industrial policy in our situation? Now, you gave me a very interesting answer then, which I've kind of remembered, and it was something to the effect of South Africa needs to mobilize the unemployed as a leading sector. And so I'd just like to put the question again to you, and to also perhaps you could say a bit more about what that means.
Thanks. We'll take some questions from the room.
Thank you very much. My name is Dennis. I just wanted to check something on developing domestic capabilities in terms of industrial development. And I want to give one example just to bring the point home. If you look at AGOA, which is Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, which is a preferential access to US market given to sub-Saharan Africa countries, it has been there for 20 years, expiring in 2025. the essence was to build capacity, industrial capacity locally in sub-Saharan Africa, especially in textile and apparel. But if you take stock of that, which is now 20 years now, most of sub-Saharan African countries, they have not done much. And what has been happening is that if you look at textile, most of what happened is there's a lot of flow of capital to Africa to take advantage of that preferential access. And what they have done is just they come to export processing zones or industrial parks, set up a factory, import all the fabric, they just do stitching and export to US markets. And they have not built any backward linkages to the farmers in terms of cotton and all that. So what sort of industrial policy can sub-Saharan African countries put in place so that by the time that preferential access comes to an end, that we have some sort of domestic capabilities? Because it's going to expire in the next 5 years. It has been there for 20. But if you look at most of countries in Africa, they have not built any industrial capabilities to take advantage of that preferential access. I must think out Ethiopia. They have tried to take advantage of that. I think they have done a bit of backward linkages, especially in textile and apparel. Thank you.
Roberto?
Yeah, thank you, Fiona. Roberto from the European Union. And I was very inspired by this debate, specifically when we were talking about the role of technology and the link between technology, job creation in middle-income countries. I want to expand it further. Fight against climate change. This is a top priority we're discussing in Glasgow right now. How much do you see actually this as a challenge or as an opportunity in the situation of South Africa and the middle-income country? Or do you think this is mainly actually, and all the technologies that come with it and the industrialization efforts around it, is it something that is mainly a developed country issue, or is a middle-income country having also to drive the horse or the cart in this respect? Thank you.
Stefano?
Thank you, Stefano Ponte, Copenhagen Business School and University of Johannesburg. I would like to raise a word of caution in relation to some of the broad changes that are expected to happen, and a lot of people are talking about sort of the reaction in terms of how value chains are being reorganized in view of COVID. And some of these things, of course, were happening also before COVID. So we hear a lot about reshoring and nearshoring. This is happening, but it's not happening as fast as we thought 5 or 10 years ago. And where it's happening is happening in the context of not the reshoring of jobs, but rather of functions than automation and robotics. Regional value chains, number 2, that is definitely happening, and it's very important. And I think UJ has an important foot in this context. But again, what are the various possibilities for places like South Africa in that context needs to be not taken for granted, but rather understood properly. The last 2 points I'm making is this talk about, oh, we are moving from just in time to just in case, number 1. Number 2, that the big buyers will be diversifying their suppliers regionally. That's a big assumption. And it will really depend on how the world economy reacts upon in the next couple of years in relation to COVID. There is a balancing effort here between risk management on one side and cost and competitiveness on the other side. And if we take for granted that these things are happening as opposed to this is a blip and then we're going to go back into real kind of cost cutting and the minimization of cost, I think it was going to create problems in relation to possible changes in industrial policy. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last question is virtually from J.H. Loopsa. Please go ahead.
Hello, thank you so much for the talk. My name is Jörg. I'm a South African PhD student here at LSE, and I wanted to ask a question about, linked to what I said on the floor now, about how our understanding of transnational corporations. So my question is, do you think that we have a adequate theoretical and analytical understanding of how strategies that are implemented by TNCs affect both the structure of value chains, but also local politics and kind of how the government reacts to certain changes?
Thank you. Then back to the panel. So please pick and choose what you would like to respond to and make any closing remarks at the same time. Shall we go back to, well, let's go in reverse order. Alan, shall we start with you?
Thanks, Fiona. Actually, a lot of the comments were directed towards me. I'm not sure I'll be able to respond to all of them. Firstly, yes, to Nimrod, I agree that those things did happen in the late 90s and early 2000s, but I don't think they were a result of the, I mean, I don't understand how they were a result of the industrial policy, even though the industrial policy wasn't a formalized policy or a sort of government policy. It wasn't a law, wasn't something that had been adopted in a formal way in cabinet. I don't think that it was responsible for that. I think that decisions, you know, in the Treasury and in the Reserve Bank and elsewhere were responsible for those outcomes. It's something I would have talked a bit more about if there'd been time. But I think that essentially the issue of the management of the exchange.
Feel free if you would like to make a quick comment on that, because I know you did talk earlier about the coordination between trade and industrial policy. So if you want to comment as well on macro and industrial.
Well, I just wanted to say that there are a couple of macro issues. The one macro issue is the exchange rate, and the exchange rate was never managed and never has been managed, except, you know, perhaps recently and perhaps for a time under Joe Marcus, in a way that supported industrialization. It's been very volatile, and it's often been overvalued, driven by the price of commodities and inflation targeting, rather than by any kind of domestic development objectives, unfortunately. And that's reinforced by South Africa's historic dependence on portfolio investment in stocks and in government bonds, which has always driven these very, very conservative monetary policies. And I think that it's, you know, hopefully, you know, at some point we'd be able to have better ones. The second one was, I think, you know, Nimrod talked about the system favoring heavy industry. I think the system still favors a heavy industry. The taxation structures and so on favor capital investment, and in fact the you know, at least 2, possibly 3 of the chapters in the book points to the continued imbalance within industrial sectors between the upper end of the value chain and the lower end of the value chain, where the steel producers and the chemicals manufacturers dominate power in relation to the downstream producers. That I don't see that the industrial policy that we've had since then has fundamentally altered that power relationship. I hope it is doing that, but it's not. You know, the 2 chapters on plastics and on steel suggest that it's still with us. You know, Ha-Joon, I wasn't really trying to and Arkebe, perhaps I stated my position a little bit unclearly. It's not that I was saying that you were wrong in what you said. I was trying to extend the conversation really into the question of what does automation and robotization mean for developing countries. And although I think it's true that nothing's fixed, and we have the opportunity to respond to possibilities and opportunities, and I think people at UJ are doing good work on that. The fact that China, which is the world's biggest market, is adopting automation and robotization faster than anybody else on earth changes our previous assumption that labor-intensive industries in China would likely move to the site where labor was most abundant and relatively cheap. I think there was an assumption for a long time in Africa that there would, and you know, Ethiopia developed some of its strategies on the basis of not that assumption, but of the reality, certainly, that industries would migrate to cheaper labor markets. So that is not as straightforward as it used to be. That's all I was saying, and I do accept the qualifications on that position. That that doesn't affect all sectors equally. I think Ha-Joon made that point. On climate change, you know, I think the climate change question is, you know, ideal kind of issue to look at in relation to regional value chains. Africa has a massive opportunity in terms of green growth. It's a deficit. It's a massive deficit, I think, as several people have pointed out. We are very short of energy in Africa, but we also have the opportunity and the possibility of developing renewable energy and adopting renewable energy at a relatively early stage of our industrialization process. And those technologies can be part of our industrialization process. So the countries of Africa can feed into each other with similar climatic conditions, similar other conditions, the kind of technologies that can harness renewable energies effectively. So I'm not saying Africa should look inwardly and not try to continue to be integrated into global value chains. I think that there are still massive opportunities, and the big markets will be outside of Africa for probably millennia to come. We can't ignore that fact, but we should be developing sustainable development strategies that take the region more seriously. I guess that was the point I was making.
Thank you, Alan.
So, yeah, I guess that's my, summation. You know, I think it has been a very rich and exciting conversation, and I wish it could be longer. Thanks.
Yeah, no, we definitely needed longer with the range of issues and insights. Arkebe, would you like to share your thoughts?
Thank you, Fiona. On the global value chain, during this COVID-19, we have seen that the global value chain have not worked smoothly, and we're not resilient. But also the current research shows that the global value chain is not changing fundamentally. It's still, the basic features are there. And even from industry players, what they see is how to make the global value chain much leaner in the current context, because the COVID-19 showed that there is a lot of fat or excessive inefficiency within the global value chain. The second one is the mitigating the risks and considering the issue of diversification. So when we look with the opportunity in Africa, the global value chain is not going to change geographical concentration as well, but it will benefit us to some extent as the big multinational corporations are also considering to reduce their risks by not over-depending on specific region or country. But this has implication on different industries differently. Like auto, it's going to be more concentrated, auto industry, rather than fragmented. In other industries, there may be some diversification of the towards regional value chain. And then the issue of resilience is what has become quite evident. I just wanted to mention this. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, back to you, Ha-Joon.
Thank you. Yeah, Anthony. Yeah, I don't remember when I talked to you in Cape Town. But yeah, I mean, my view is that you know, unemployment is not a natural phenomenon. I mean, it can be changed through changes in policies and institutions. Of course, if you are South Africa with official unemployment rate of 25–30%, I mean, the challenge is a lot bigger than what you see in other countries. But you know, you can already see from what Alan said, what others said, some ways to kind of increase employment. I mean, starting from the more obvious things, you know, I mean, South Africa has suffered from one of the most restrictive macroeconomic policies in the last 25 years. I mean, it's been relaxed a bit in the recent period, but between the late 90s and mid 2010s, I mean, it has almost always had one of the highest real interest rate in the world, the hugely overvalued exchange rate. So these restricted the ability of companies to invest and create jobs. So if you change that, there'll be more jobs. Yeah. Also, you can create jobs through regulations in especially the reproductive sector. You know, if the government says that we are going to reduce the number of pupils per teacher in schools, that if it says we are going to increase the number of nurses and care home workers per patients and residents, these will create jobs. Of course, people will say, oh, but then who's going to pay for them? But you know, these things are actually being done at home all the time by women. So that why don't you formalize it? That if that this open unemployment is a concern. Yeah? Also, you could encourage creation of jobs in certain labor-intensive sectors. Some of them might be done through, you know, encouraging foreign companies to increase local sourcing in the labor-intensive sectors. But also, it could come from the creation of demand for labor-intensive products that come from people who have recently got employed through other policies, because basically workers tend to consume things that are more labor-intensive. So with that downward income redistribution, whether it's through direct transfers through the welfare system or through the creation of more jobs, you will increase demand for products that are produced by labor-intensive sectors. And therefore, that will also increase labor demand. Yeah?
No, thank you.
Sorry.
I don't have time at the moment. Okay.
What's going on?
Thank
Somebody
you.
who needs to be muted. I can't see who it is, but a culprit, please.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So what I was trying to say was, and yeah, not to forget. I mean, you know, we have all agreed that we need to. South Africa and other countries need to increase the investments in the renewable energy sector, and that sector is actually a lot more labor intensive than the traditional energy sectors. You know, you need workers to maintain the solar panels, you know, and stuff like that. So and you know, a lot of energy can be saved by the hiring people to insulate homes better and so on. So that you could use the need to green your economy to create more jobs. So, you know, I'm not saying that any of these or even all of them put together will you know, be able to reduce South Africa's unemployment problem dramatically in a short period of time. But you know, you have to keep doing these things, and you know, the worst thing that you can do is to think that something is inevitable, something is kind of natural phenomenon that cannot be changed, whether it's technology or unemployment. You know, a lot of these things, at least to a large extent, if not completely, are within human control. The worst thing you can do is to assume that they are not within our control and just give up. And finally, a very quick comment. Yeah, I really appreciate what Stefano and Arkebe said about global value chains. You know, we really need to get into the details, look at different sectors, different countries, corporate strategies, how different countries are responding, because this is a very kind of complex thing, and we cannot just say that there'll be reshoring, less offshoring, you know, nearshoring, you know, multiple sourcing. Yeah, all of these things are happening, but you know, how important are they? And how important are they in different sectors? We really need more kind of detailed sectoral and country-based studies to understand this. So I think those comments were very much appreciated. Yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Well, thanks to all three of the panelists. These are issues that we could easily have spent much more time discussing. But we'll have to leave it there because of time. I think it's been a great discussion and a great engagement between the panelists and with both the online and in-person audiences. So thank you again for your time and for the thought-provoking insights. We're now going to go for a 45-minute lunch break. So we will reconvene at 1:30 South African time. Apologies to those online. We didn't organize any Uber Eats, so you're on your own. And we will see you in 45 minutes time for the session on inclusion, empowerment, and barriers to entry. Thank you.
Let's see if they got what we hear.
So, lunch will be served where we had the tea.
I don't know. Please remember.
Yeah.
Again,